Hey everybody, Danielle Egnew here. Welcome to inPsight Radio. I am so excited to have all of you join me, and we can all be the fly on the wall of everywhere at once. That is the glory of getting a chance to have the inside scoop and take an inside look at just about every world issue there is out there. I tell you, the thing that was striking me about this last week was the number of geomagnetic storms that we've been having. And that's not unusual. The sun has these, it's kind of naughty sounding. The sun has these coronal mass ejections. Seriously, that's what they're called. CMEs, coronal mass ejections, or otherwise known as solar flares. And those suckers barrel at, millions of miles an hour towards the Earth, and they come and they hit our Earth's magnetosphere and wing-ding around us, and we get this awesome opportunity to see some great northern lights. Yet it also lights up our ionosphere, and our ionosphere is the net that wraps the Earth. And if you could imagine a fishnet with all the little diamond shapes, and the more you pull the fishnet in different directions, the more that fishnet is going to be able to reflect weight, and it's going to stretch out. And when our ionosphere is impacted with this massive amount of solar radiation, it disrupts connections in cell phones, because the ionosphere is sort of like that one awkward brick wall at the playground where you're batting the handball against that wall. That's what our cell signals do when they bounce off of our ionosphere. And that's how we actually transmit tower signals anyway around the world, because clearly the world is not flat, even though there's a lot of people out there that believe that the world is flat, which I think is just fascinating, that people actually believe the world is flat. Okay, knock yourself out. They think all the actual round globe pictures are like an artist's interpretation or photoshopped of the flat Earth. Completely fascinated by that. Anyway, so if we're trying to bounce cell signals around our world, we beam those suckers up off the ionosphere, and it bounces down and it covers the curvature of the Earth. So when we have these tremendous solar flares, which we've been having, we have a lot of troubles with cell signals, and anything that has to do with a radio signal or a satellite signal, that becomes really challenging. The other electromagnetic issue that we see some skitzing and fritzing within during a solar storm like that, or a coronal mass ejection. Come on, just say that with me. Coronal mass ejection. You have to say it like that too. Say it way in the back of your throat. Coronal mass ejection. That just sounds so official. Oh my God. I'm sorry. All of a sudden I'm 13. I don't know what happened to me. Anyway, when we have all of this electromagnetic energy that is hitting the Earth like we're feeling right now, then that also affects the mind. It affects the brain. It affects people's dreams and their thought processes. It affects the vortex points on our globe, which are huge. I mean, honest to God, the Earth is a giant spinning electromagnet, and it's covered in vortex points. And within these vortex points, we have tons and tons of off-worlders, interdimensionals, extra-dimensionals that are coming in and out of where these space-time folds are activated. And that's just because we're on a giant electromagnet. So these vortexes are opening all over the place. So when we have these solar flares, I'm not going to say it. When we have these solar flares, then we have massive amounts of paranormal activity, in addition to our brains being supercharged from all of this extra energy that's been thrown through the electromagnetic net around the Earth called the ionosphere. That is full of this magnificent, really fancy, cool substance that we have zero idea pretty much how it works, called plasma. And that plasma is what relays all of that heavy magnetic energy and radiation energy that comes off of the sun. And I'm giving you guys like unbelievably watered down bullet points here. If you really would like to learn about the actual structure of the ionosphere of the Earth, please research this on Google. I'm just telling you, when we have solar flares, everybody's brain skitzes out, communication skitzes out, and the vortex points on the Earth just get huge. And some of them actually close up because the Earth is also a moving entity. This is a true deal. So all this show, we're going to be talking about UFOs. We are going to be hitting on some elements in our United States government that are going on right now. We're also going to be talking about what the heck happens when you have this much, if you want to call it electromagnetic energy running through the Earth. What happens to Mother Earth? What happens to our brain? What happens to the paranormal life around us? And I mean, how do we deal with all of that at this point? Because solar flares are they're a commonality. They're not an anomaly. They're a common thing. So really, when we look at the vortexes, and I'm going to start there just because of that, 6 minutes of science class for you guys. Aren't you so glad you subscribed to this podcast? See, now you never have to watch the Discovery Channel. You are just killing it across the board in terms of your knowledge base today, let me tell you. So what's been going on when we, on the Earth, when these big, huge solar flares open up these vortexes, we have a spike in our UFO sightings. Now, this is not to necessarily say that there are more UFOs coming through these vortex points just because there's a solar flare. It's to say that the fabric of space-time is then made thinner or easier to manipulate for these temporal travelers. So we see a lot more UFO activity during times of solar flares, just because it noodles with the Earth's atmosphere in such a way that these interspatial travelers, they can actually get here easier. And how does that work? Well, we've got some really big vortex points around the globe. You guys have probably heard of Sedona. Sedona is an enormously huge vortex point. And Sedona is one of dozens of spots like that. There's one in Greece. There's one in South America. There's one on Easter Island. There's one right smack in the middle of Australia. I mean, these big, heavy vortex points that exist up at Stonehenge. There's actually quite a few collective vortex points in the British Isles. It's really fascinating, and that has to do with the longitudinal effect of the ley lines on our planet. So I want you guys in your mind to picture the Earth. Please picture it round, because it's actually round. So you've got the Earth out here, and it's round, not flat like a Frisbee, round like a ball. And while you're looking at the Earth, if you put a pin, say on the top right-hand side of the globe, and then you drilled a hole, just like when you were kids, remember? I'm going to dig a hole to China. Okay, you go for it. If we drilled a hole from that pin all the way down in a perfect diagonal, all the way out through the Earth, you're going to come out somewhere in the southern hemisphere that's exactly across from that point on the Earth. Now, this is not a rule of thumb for all vortexes, yet a majority of vortex points on the Earth, if you have one on point A, in the northern hemisphere, you're going to have one on point B, literally straight through the Earth in the southern hemisphere. Or collectively, they could both be at the equator, just on different sides of the planet. And the reason being that occurs is that vortexes, again, you got to think in terms of magnetic activity here, guys. Vortexes are electromagnetic wormholes. That's the best way to put it. And obviously, you guys, a wormhole is a phenomenon in space, et cetera, and so on. However, the electromagnetic energy of the Earth begins to fold over on itself, like you're folding a towel on a bed, and that energy just continues to fold over on itself, it creates a harmonic, and that harmonic then becomes a vortex or a soft spot or a rip in space-time. And when you have those dimensional rips, and really, it's more of a dimensional rip than it is a space-time rip, yet I suppose that's debatable, depending on how nerdy you get. However, that space-time rip then enables all kinds of beings to travel through those dimensional ether systems. So I always find it fascinating during the time of solar flares to go on to, say, the MUFON site or go on to any of these UFO watch sites. And there's a number of them out there. There's quite a few that are really kind of out there, even for my taste. And people, you got to get way out there before it's out there for my taste. But there are a few out there that kind of tip the scale of what the heck was that. However, if you go on to more reputable UFO sites, you can find that during the time frame of these vortex points opening up, because of the solar flares, we're seeing a lot more UFOs. So for all of you UFO watchers out there, and I'm hoping it's everybody, because truly we're going to learn so much from our off-world cultures coming here, and they have been coming here for not just hundreds of thousands of years, but millions of years before our species was even up and running out of the primordial muck of the mud. These incredible beings were here. So I'm noting that not only are our solar flares igniting different dreams in people, so if you've been having wonky dreams or weird dreams or really intense spiritual sensations, like as in spiritual, what you might think of as more of a traditional God feeling, or that type of Holy Spirit feeling, or really literally feeling that universal consciousness, however you term that. We're going to feel all of that far more presently during the time of solar flares, because our vortex system is expanded, because our ionosphere is getting pulled on and tugged on and lit up like a Christmas tree, and it causes all of that electromagnetic folding like the towel, and pretty soon we have all these vortex points open, so we're seeing a lot more UFOs. What else are we seeing? We're seeing some wonky behavior in people. Wonky behavior in people. This heinous, horrible tragedy that happened in Florida. Certainly not to say that a solar flare is to blame for that individual's choice to shoot people. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the brain is an electromagnetic organ. And just in the same way that people just flat out lose their ever-loving minds during a full moon, during solar flares, people can really find it difficult to navigate and to manage, because of this same electromagnetic issue in the mind. So if you're finding that you've been skitzed out the last week or the last 2 weeks, because even as these solar flares are building, that's still throwing off a ton of energy from the sun, just because the flare hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean that that giant hydrogen ball 96 million miles away from us isn't throwing off a little tood out there while it is charging up, because it does. There's so much energy in space. It's unbelievable how much energy and radiation and all kinds of stuff flies around out there. So I'm not saying, obviously, that a solar flare made the shooter in Florida do that. However, I do find it interesting that on the week or 2 weeks, 2.5, I suppose, leading up into these solar flare times, we see an outbreak in violence. And I mean, even up in my home state of Montana, there were more shootings and weird stabbings in little bitty towns where normally that kind of stuff gets worked out over a beer and a game of pool. I mean, just tensions are very, very high. And it's not to suggest that solar flares make people aggravated. They can. It's to simply suggest that there is a lot of energy hitting our planet right now that is affecting a lot of different things. So if you're feeling squirrely, if you're feeling itchy, weird, cranky, crusty, maybe you're energized, maybe it's a good thing, maybe you've got like tons and tons of energy and you're not sure what to do. This is in fact due to our solar flare patterns and our vortex points opening. Because here's part 2 of all this. Okay, it's not just the flares hitting the ionosphere, lighting up the ionosphere, charging that upper plasma, sending a really heavy electromagnetic field down to the earth. It's not that. It's not just that. It is that. But it's not just that. The other part is when we have these big wide open vortexes, guys, you guys would be amazed at what comes through these vortex points. I mean, we've got interdimensionals, which are beings that exist not off-world in our third dimension. They exist on a realm or even on another Earth in our intersphere of dimensions. So they are interdimensional. They are so think of this. It's weird to try to explain interdimensionals to people. So we're gonna break it down. We're gonna break it down today. We're breaking a lot down today. Gang, I love you guys. You're awesome. And gals. I know you guys, it's certainly not a gendered term. And now that we've got so much focus on gender, I catch myself saying you guys, and I'm like, and gals, and all you non-gender specific folk, just folks. Such a musician. Wow, that came from my musician days. Guys, load up the rig, guys. And I was generally talking to women. Weird. Anyway, so when we're explaining what we're looking at here in terms of interdimensional, I really want you folks, I'm going to work on that. I want you folks to really imagine, those people movers at airports? Okay, they're like a flat escalator and you just stand on them and people are walking by and other people are standing there and they're being moved along, George Jetson style all the way down. All right. The people movers. So I want you to imagine that our third dimension is on a people mover. And we're just trucking along at about 2 or 3 miles an hour. And some of us are standing on the right side and some of us are walking on the left side. Okay. Right next to us is another people mover, but it's moving at about 10 miles an hour. And it's very difficult for us to get onto that people mover without getting our feet literally yanked out from underneath of us unless we get a running start. So the second people mover that's next to us, that's moving at a different pace, I want you to go ahead and call that a different dimension. So that pace over there is really cooking. It's moving really, really quickly. And then there's another people mover next to it, and it's going maybe 20 miles an hour. And there's just no way in heck, unless you're a decathlete and you can get a really good running start, that you can get onto that thing without just really finding it difficult to get your footing. So I want you to think of different dimensions in terms of moving at different paces, because that's really what's going on. Literally, when I feel out psychically into the ether system, there are hundreds and hundreds of dimensions that I'm coming across. And I mean, it gets really trippy after a while. What I find is that our third dimension moves a lot slower than many other dimensions. They're literally just moving faster. The particle matter is vibrating faster in that universe. Okay. So, so put your hand in front of your face unless you're driving, that would be a bad thing. If you're not driving, put your hand in front of your face. Now just wave really fast. Okay. You see how your fingers blur together because your eyes can't track all of those independent movements, and it just looks like a big blur and a big smear. You see that? That's what's going on in different dimensions, only times a bazillion. They're moving so much faster than we are in many, many dimensions. And there are a lot of dimensions that move slower than we move. We call that low vibration. So when we're talking about solar flares and it opens up these vortex points on the Earth, and we're talking about these interdimensional beings coming through these vortex points, why the heck would they even want to? If we're moving so much slower than they are, why would they even be coming through? Well, it's a lot easier to go to a realm moving slower than it is to go to a realm moving faster. And a lot of these interdimensional beings, a lot of people mistake them actually for alien beings, off-world beings, ETs. A lot of these interdimensional beings have really worked on like a meditation, slowing their particle matters down so that they can navigate this third dimension. And how many of you out there have heard of shadow people? We've all heard of shadow people, right? For those of you that haven't, those of us who investigated the paranormal, especially in the 2000s when that was really, really popular, like 2001 all the way till about 2012, that was like the hot thing to do was paranormal investigate. And lots of people still do it. It's really fun. If you've never done it, I really recommend it. However, you'll come across what is known as shadow people. Shadow people. And what I think is so fascinating about the shadow people is that folks will tell stories about the fact that they're not very nice. They're kind of mean and they're kind of snarky and they play rotten tricks on you and they're just kind of crappy beings. They're not always the nicest beings. Shadow people are not aliens. They come from a different dimension. And my personal theory about shadow people is that they are human beings in a different Earth scenario. If you watch Flash, there's Earth 1 and Earth 2 and Earth 12 and all of that. And a lot of our superhero stories are really kind of catching on to the fact that not only are we a multiverse, yet there are beings crossing those multiverses all the time. And so if you can imagine these shadow people as being human beings in a different version of an Earth that moves slower or faster, and coming back over here just to poke us with a stick and be terrible, the behavior of shadow people, quite honestly, and the energy off of shadow people. I've encountered a few shadow people in my time, and that energy is human. It's human. So I look at these beings and I'm thinking, look, I don't know which dimension you're from. I'm not sure if you're working at the Large Hadron Collider and you guys are an experiment or what your story is or what dimension you're coming through here. However, shadow people have a very human energy signature to them. However, their vibrational pattern obviously isn't from here, and they're moving so much faster than we are that just like the hand in front of your face moving super duper fast, they look like a shadow because they're moving so fast. So when our vortex points open up the way they've been open, beings that are able to cross that ether sphere oftentimes do. And I noticed that a lot of beings that come from slower vibration places will make their way through in those open vortex portals. And those beings aren't always the snappiest little groups. We like to think of hell, the biblical hell, as a place inside the earth where there's a lot of fire and brimstone. And that just kills me because actually there is no actual description of actual hell in the Bible. No, there's not. There's not. I know this stuff. I'm a pastor. I know. Don't laugh. I am a really outside the box pastor. However, it freaks me out because if you look in the Old Testament, do you know how many times the word hell is mentioned in the Old Testament? 0. The big goose egg. It's not in there. In the Torah, there's nothing in there. And the Old Testament, of course, is taken from what we like to call the Torah. It's actually Christianity is just this wacky offshoot of Judaism. It really is. However, this whole idea of hell, the reason I'm talking about hell is not to give you guys a big old Bible lesson here. It's because hell, I'm thinking that Pat Benatar song, Hell is for children. Oh my God. Hell, it was a misinterpretation in the New Testament of Jesus talking about an actual valley and a place where they used to bury garbage and burn it. And there was weird sacrifices in the valley and they would burn bodies over there. And it just was a gross place and it stunk. And the super duper cliff notes are basically Jesus was just saying, look, you can be a good person or you can act in a way that's going to make you feel like, you rolled around in that gross valley where all these gross things are going on and the inside of you is going to feel that gross. And somehow it got interpreted as you're going to go to hell under the ground. And then it got completely cross-collateralized with the Greek mythology, with Hades and the underworld, which Hades wasn't necessarily a bad place in Greece. You know, the underworld wasn't this dark, evil, scary, terrifying place. It really wasn't. The underworld back in the day was just where you went when you died. You paid the river keeper at the river Styx some money and stuck those on your eyelids, and they took you across the river into Hades, and you just lived out your days, you know, whatever, as a dead person in the underworld. Yet somehow we've got this idea, this Christianized idea of hell being just this place that is under the ground and really terrifying for people. And that always fascinates me, because when I do run across beings that come from these different dimensions, that come from a lower or slower dimension, a lot of times those beings are pretty chaotic. They bring a chaotic energy with them. Even though their energy signature is rolling at a much slower pace, they've got a heaviness to them. And we can call these beings dark beings, or beings that are from chaotic darkness, or demons, or whatever you want to call them. Yet these beings do serve a purpose in this dimension, and they act a whole heck of a lot like sharks. They really do. And the weirdest part about these beings is that when they get here to perform this function, we tend to decide that this darkness is targeting us. This demonic activity is targeting us. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you could look at you could look at an angel as an extra-dimensional or interdimensional being, because they're not aliens. They don't come from a different planet in our third dimension. They come from a completely separate realm that is moving at a much faster vibration than ours is. And when I speak to these angels, and I talk to angels all day, every day, 24/7, all the time, in my dreams, in my waking life, there are angels. Chat, 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 chat. They are chatty Cathys, chatty. So those beings, technically, we could label them as interdimensionals. We can also label a demon as an interdimensional, because really, that's really what they are. They come from a much slower dimension. If you want to call it a dimension of darkness, or you want to call it a dimension of heaviness, or however that spins around for you, those beings come in and they perform a function here on Earth. And I bet you're kind of interested to know what their function is, because, we learn, if you're raised in a traditional Christian American household, all you learn about demons is that they are tormenting human beings because God loves people. Therefore, demons, for some reason, are acting like the girlfriend who's been jilted and wants to keep the sweater and not bring it back, and go find the kids at school that she used to see at home and try to secretly take them out for ice cream. And then when they won't go, she pushes them in the mud because she's trying to get back at the father that jilted her. I mean, really, you guys and gals and folks, I'm working on this. Okay, wait, catching myself. Folks, when we look at this, what do we have? We have some fan fiction about how darkness targets us, when really demonic activity is, for all intents and purposes, an interdimensional being. And they come from a dimension that I have very little interest in ever going there. And they have very little interest in dealing with me. I deal with light, they deal with dark, whatever. Their function on the earth, darkness is like a shark that swims through water. And it swims through the water and eats out all of the trash in the ocean. It eats out the dead things. It eats the license plates that are laying on the bottom. Sharks clean the oceans. Darkness in our third dimension eats pain, suffering, depression, anything that we put out our crown chakra or our heart chakra that has a slower vibration, then hangs in our ether sphere. This is a real thing. This is a real thing, folks. I see this all the time. In my spiritual work and in the way that I am wired to see the world. I see energy signatures all over the place. When we're really, really upset And especially if we're in a place of suffering, because I can be in pain, yet not be suffering. I can simply be experiencing that pain and I'm mad and I'm unhappy about it, yet I'm not suffering. When we are suffering, which is a whole different spiritual enchilada altogether, and we'll get to that in a minute, it does put off an energy signature. And that energy signature, I want you to think about a smokestack out of the top of your head. And if you've really been sad for a long time, or you've been hurt for a long time, or just got the blues, I mean, listen, we're human, okay? We are going to be sad. We are going to be angry. We are going to be afraid. These are all human attributes, gang. So we don't need to demonize, play on words there, a bad, lame play on words, but a play on words. I don't want to demonize being sad. Yet what I'm attempting to put out here is that when we've got all of this upsetness that's pouring out the crown chakra, I want you to picture smoke, like a smokestack going up out of your head, out of your heart chakra. And what happens if you have a lot of smoke in your kitchen? Well, by God, you're opening up the windows, you're opening up the doors, the dog is looking at you like, why didn't you flip that sausage over? What is wrong with you? Can I have it now that it's burned? I mean, you fill the space with smoke. Now, remember our good friend, Albert Einstein. I love Albert Einstein. He shares my birthday. Albert Einstein is a February 28th Pisces. And I love Albert Einstein just for this reason. Well, besides the fact that he shares my birthday, I love him because he recognized spiritual physics before anybody talked about spiritual physics. They just talked about physical physics. And Albert Einstein said energy cannot be destroyed, yet only transferred. So if I'm putting all this smoke of depression or sadness or whatever, and I'm not picking on people who have depression, I'm simply saying when we get into these spaces of being really bummed out for long periods of time, we do put a particular smoke in our ethers. Darkness, chaotic darkness, demonic activity, whatever you want to call those beings that live in that interdimensional realm that moves much slower than ours, that is a much slower vibration than ours is, okay? Those beings act like sharks here on Earth. And they go through this dimension, and that vibration that we put out there of depression or sadness or anger or whatever it is, usually it's suffering somehow. Those beings eat it. They eat it, just like a shark eating the crud out of the ocean. So here are all of these interdimensional dark beings or demons or demonic activity or whatever you want to call it. And they're swimming around and they're attracted to the pockets of smoke in your kitchen. So you'll notice that a lot of demonic activity is attracted to, oddly, people who fear them the most. This is a true deal. I have gone on a couple of exorcisms in my life. I've gone on with paranormal teams and gone on these adventures to help clear what people think are ghosts out of the house. And actually they're chaotic dark interdimensionals, or what people like to call demons. And I'm thinking, oh man. So one of the first things I'll do is sit down with that family and talk to them about who's been sad or what's been going on or what tension, what suffering has been going on in the house. And of course, nobody wants to admit in their perfect family that there's any suffering going on. Yet, you eventually get to the bottom of things and folks will tell the truth. And you begin to recognize that these beings, these chaotic, dark, demonic beings, they're pain eaters. They're fear eaters. And especially if we fear them, that is a very specific smoke that we're putting into the ethers. And they're like, wow, that smoke has my name all over it. I'm going to go eat me some of that despair. Yeah. So really, if we look at our angelic realm as interdimensionals or extra dimensionals, we look at our demonic realm as inter or extra dimensionals, kind of changes our viewpoint on these beings. Because I really believe that the human condition tends to think that these beings are all traveling through space from another place to get here. That would be our off-world friends, and many of them are temporal travelers. So they poke holes in space-time and kind of jump through the hole rather than going put, for hundreds of millions of light years. And they're all skeletons by the time they get somewhere. They just poke a hole in space and go right through. So when we're dealing with solar flares, and that's actually what this topic is about, believe it or not, and vortex points. When we're dealing with those solar flares that open up the vortexes as our ionosphere flexes, that lets through more easily, far more angelic life, far more chaotic dark life, any traveling shadow person that wants to hang around and come poke people with a stick. I am fairly convinced that shadow people are either a dimension of humans in the future, and they're on some kind of game show where they wrap up in a black suit and they go back in time and, poke the not very developed people with a stick and ask them to do terrible things to themselves. And whoever can get more old school humans to do bad things to themselves, wins a trip to Bahrain or something. I'm pretty sure that they are human because of the way that they act towards other humans. People, let me tell you what, humans, we have a very specific action towards one another, and we are trackable. We are trackable like a sea turtle from a satellite. Man, are we trackable. So are other life beings. And so that's why I'm saying that when we're talking about darkness being attracted to people who are in pain, let's take that Florida shooter for just a minute. Now, I'm guessing that individual was not very balanced, just listening to what they had to say about how that person talked. And it seems that there's some sort of mental issues there. And folks who struggle with mental issues can also struggle with a lot of fear and a lot of dread and a lot of suffering. And what is that Florida shooter doing? Well, he's putting all of this smoke out into the kitchen, and all of this darkness is attracted to that. Now, I am in no way saying that the devil made the Florida shooter do what he did in that school, in that state. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that every single thing is connected, whether we like it or not. And if we are somebody who struggles with being afraid of darkness, oh man, the best thing I can tell you here is do your best to overcome the fear, because it's the fear that they're attracted to. They're not hunting you because you're God's creature. Demons aren't after people because they have some secret, agenda war with God. They're not warring. Light doesn't war against anything. Do you really think that light and dark are just fighting out in the ethers endlessly? You guys really think about this, folks. Think about this. That wouldn't make any sense. It would make zero sense. No, light and dark are not continually battling. Light is light and dark is dark, and the area to which they grind together occasionally is called humanity. And humans, we are the great mixing pot for light and dark. Good Lord. And I'm not saying good and evil. I said light and dark. Because from darkness's perspective, light is pretty evil. It eradicates it. What happens to darkness if you walk into a room and flick the light on? Bye-bye, darkness. From the darkness perspective, light is just horrendous. It's a tyrant. It's an annihilator. And really, from the light's perspective, dark just serves a purpose, and it does what it does, and there it is. So, I could go on and on and on about the different layers of chaotic darkness or demonic life, and I'll do that in another podcast. The point is, guys and gals and folks, that the more that we really don't tie together how unbelievably interconnected we are spiritually, mentally, and physically with absolutely everything, including a hydrogen ball that's 96 million miles away from us, then we're going to have a really, really hard time even wrapping our brains around something like our United States government. And how are we attached to that? And we've got all of this crazy, crazy stuff flying around right now. And people are wondering if we're going to go to war with North Korea. And and our president is saying that we should arm teachers. And I mean, honestly, we are getting a chance to look at what illusion consciousness looks like. Yet for us to sit here and say, okay, all that stuff that Donald Trump is doing up there in Washington, D.C., that has nothing to do with me. He's a cray-cray, and it has nothing to do with me. That's not really true. Everybody's got everything to do with everybody. We're all connected, right? Just like the darkness and the vortexes and the angels and the solar flares and all of our vortex activity, we are connected. So when we're watching the president of the United States making really, really weird claims that some teachers need to have guns, because that makes sense. That I'm a Montanan. We're a gun culture up here. I don't own guns, but boy, it sure makes sense to arm teachers so that teachers are shooting at bad guys and bad guys are shooting at teachers all over the tops of the heads of the kids, of course, because everyone's such a crack shot that nobody accidentally shoots a child. It just, really, I mean, it's laughable. It's laughable. And when we look at this absurdity, and by the way, we're not going to arm teachers, gang, and everybody's going to dial back off the NRA, and the NRA is going to have to dial back, and it's going to just eventually shrink down to a handful of people that are, waving rifles in the air and screaming, they took our jobs and whatever. And the rest of the normal gun owners, of which I know dozens and dozens here in Montana, a lot of people own guns. So if a grizzly bear comes through your back door and it's mating season and it's a bad day and Mama Grizzly isn't thinking straight, they own that gun for that reason. So, it's not that we need to argue morality. It's that when we're looking at the absurdity of these energies and the illusion quality of these energies, I can tell you with 100% accuracy here, not because I'm the greatest psychic in the world, just because I'm looking at the spiritual physics of all of this. And I believe in the power of deduction, which I use a lot in my job, especially when looking at energies that are transferring from one aspect to another. And what we're looking at is just an old, outmoded, dying old beast that is an energy of avarice and of greed. And I don't care where anybody's political affiliation falls, actually. My biggest question is, hey, are you a decent human being? Are you kind to others? Do you have a kindness factor involved even if you don't agree with somebody? Do you believe that you're the only person in the world that can solve all the problems? Or are you more of a collective believer that we all are part of the problem and we're all part of the solution? So when we're looking at these grievously whacked out claims, like we're going to arm the teachers, do your very best to just go ahead and have your initial emotional reaction to that. Unless, of course, you think that's a good idea, then you might just root it right on. For those of you out there listening that don't think that's a good idea, go ahead and have your reaction to it. Yet do your best not to sit and stew and stew and stew and stew on what amounts to just flat and ignorant comment. Because the more you stew on it, the more it turns into suffering. The more that it turns into suffering, then it goes out the smoke screen and smoke pipe of your head and fills the kitchen with smoke. And what have we learned today? That eats pain and suffering out of the atmosphere. Chaotic darkness or demonic activity. So we can go ahead and have our opinions. We can have our temporary emotional reactions, all right? Yet when we want to make those emotional reactions a permanent part of our fabric of what then our worldview is, case in point, oh my gosh, Donald Trump said we're going to arm teachers, so let's go to war with the NRA. Let's go to war with Donald Trump. Well, war is war. The energy of fight is fight. The energy of hate is hate. There is no such thing as righteous hatred. Just be aware of how connected we are. So here's something you could do if you are someone that heard that comment and your eyes rolled so far back into your head that now they're stuck and you're blind because you can't get them out of your cranium. That was me for a while at that comment. Then I would suggest this, and this comes courtesy of our gorgeous angelic realm, which we have learned this show are interdimensional creatures. So when we hear something that absurd, imagine being a camera and you're filming a movie and you've got this tight shot on the president. And in this tight shot, I mean, it's so framed up so tight. I mean, you can't even, it's just on his face. Like you can't see his forehead. You can't see his chin. It's just sucked right in there. Like something from a George Orwell movie. It's just scary. Okay. It's that close. And when you hear the president say things that you might just think are ridiculous, instead of becoming angry, go ahead and if you're the cameraman, this is your viewpoint. Nobody gets to control the camera but you. Okay, so go ahead and just widen that viewpoint out. And pretty soon you see a little person standing at a podium, and pretty soon the wider the shot gets, it's one little person with nobody standing around them for miles and miles saying just really ridiculous things that don't make any sense. Okay? And that is really what we're looking at, is one voice. And of course, yes, it's the president. And yes, there are some people who deeply agree with that comment that we should arm teachers. I was in the grocery store here in Montana. This is not even a lie. This is a true story. And I was standing behind a lady who was talking about how she thought it was a great idea to arm those teachers. And she was from I could tell by the way she was dressed and the regionalism in her accent that she was from an outlying area in Montana. And here in Billings, and we're the largest city in a couple states here, we'll have a lot of smaller communities come in and they buy their groceries here and then they go out to the back 240 out there. So this woman was talking about how she really felt this was a great idea and that it would stop in their tracks anybody foolish enough, if they knew that there were 20 teachers that were armed, they sure as heck weren't going to come in there with one gun. Because and this was her quote, who takes one gun to a 20-gun gunfight? That's what she said. And I suppose I could have taken that opportunity to get really, really angry about that woman's comment. Because again, I found personally, and I'm speaking for myself here, I found that comment to be very ignorant. And I don't mean she's stupid. I mean, it was ignorant, as in she didn't have the metrics or the backing to understand that somebody who's going to walk in with a semi-automatic weapon and mow down children doesn't care if there's 50 million guns in there. They are not thinking from the perspective of a person whose head's on straight going, well, should I take a semi-automatic into a 20-gun gunfight? I don't know. How many rounds can I get? Let me do the math in my brain. If they're all carrying 6 or 12 shooters and there's 20 of them, let's see. So that's 180 rounds and maybe I've got like 60 here. So, of course, if I pull my trigger too, they're not going to be thinking that way. And so there is an element of compassion and patience that is necessary in this time frame. And I know that's not what a lot of you want to hear right now. I know that. Yet when I scanned this woman, and I absolutely did, because I wanted to know where that comment came from within her. I wanted to know. So I just flat scanned her. I went all Star Trek and scanned her and pulled her files and was reading about her life in the grocery store line. And that woman, I was correct. She was from a teeny weeny town. I've never even heard of it. It was way out, about 200 miles east of us, just a little guy out there someplace. And she'd come in to get her groceries. And her whole scope was, she was 4th generation rancher. Yet the type of rancher on a smaller ranch, she wasn't the one who was going out to sell the cows. She was the one who just stayed on the land. Okay, so her world was about, as far as I could tell, about 2,000 acres. You know, that was her world. That was her planet. And so defending that planet of 2,000 acres, I'm guessing, is probably a lot more simple than dealing with somebody walking in with a semi-automatic weapon who's struggling with horrendous mental issues and has access to a weapon that's designed to kill people. And it's not to say I agree with her perspective, yet what I'm saying here is that, again, going back to the sun and the solar flares and Donald Trump, we are all connected here. And when we give off all this fear, all it does is attract more darkness. And it doesn't mean we're not going to be fearful sometimes. Yet really, let us do our best. When we hear comments like, who's going to bring one gun to a 20-gun gunfight? and you recognize the person saying that has no scope for understanding the mentality of somebody who would kill people to that radius. I mean, when we hear these things, do we become the smokestack for darkness? Do we put all this smoke out into the ethers and just fume and fume and fume and fume? Or do we think to ourselves, well, that was just, as my grandpa Lou used to say, well, that was just a jackass comment in your head, and you go about your day. Doesn't mean don't stand up for what you believe in. It doesn't mean don't stand in the gap. For those of you, I'm a person that would love to see sensible gun laws enacted. I understand there are lots of people in the United States who disagree with that. I very much feel we need to have that going on, because I can see down these timelines where we have civil wars that are trying to break out over this, and it's just insanity. So I'm all for sensible gun laws. Yet if I allow myself to put all that dark smoke out into the ether sphere while I'm freaking out over guns, I'm going to attract those interdimensional beings, especially during a solar flare time when it's easier to get through those vortex points, to come eat in my kitchen. I don't want to do that. There's just so much going on in the world right now that we've just got to do our best to be patient. And I recognize that that's not a lot of fun. Yet if you look at the bigger picture of the way that all of these spiritual physics are woven together, what we've got is we've got a situation where we either come together as a species or we watch our world extinct. I mean, that's really where we're at when we talk about demons or angels or shooters or the president, or are we going to come together on the NRA, or are we going to divide on the NRA? I mean, really, gang, when we really look at these hair-splitting, tiny, weird little pieces of what we're bringing forward here, we're looking at a lot of, if you want to call it shadow government or Illuminati, or that group of 12 people that run the money in the world who really wants to keep us fighting with one another endlessly. And that's what's going on, is just this endless battle over trying to make sure that we're separate. I mean, none of this makes any sense if you come at this from a perspective of love. None of it does. And the only thing that does make sense is that we're putting a ton of fear out there, which is attracting a lot of these interdimensional chaotic beings, which is bringing in more violence, more craziness. And it's documented that the number of hate crimes, especially anti-Semitic hate crimes, the first year that President Trump was in office, those hate crimes just flew out of the roof. A lot of anti-Semitic stuff happened. So what does that do? Well, that puts a lot of that smoke in the kitchen, and that attracts a lot of beings that are here to create chaos for the sake of having chaos created. And then more chaos is created, and then we feel weird, and we feel those chaotic beings from a dark dimension, so we get weirder, and then we do weirder things, and then we put more smoke in the kitchen, and more of those beings come to eat it, and it's this vicious cycle that just keeps going and going unless we break it. And we break it by recognizing that what's going on, if you want to call them shadow government or Illuminati, I really haven't come up with a good name for them yet, but there are a group of people, and there's about 12 of them, and they run the money, and they really are a bit sociopathic in how they do it, and some of them do it through war machining, and others do it through controlling food crops, yet they do run the money, and they run the resources, and they are attempting, this group of people, to keep us fighting with one another, because as long as we are in chaos, they're making money. Chaos equals money. Not only does chaos equal smoke in the ether sphere if you are a chaotic dark being, but that chaos equals money if you're that group of 12 to 18 people who are attempting to control the globe through restricting resources. So when we jump up in the cage like little guinea pigs, getting startled every time somebody walks into the room, every single time we hear something on the news coming out of the president's mouth or Nancy Pelosi's mouth, or you name a person and a figure that's going to push your buttons, whatever it is, we are feeding the agenda of that. I think the right calls it deep state, the left calls it shadow government, conspiracists call it Illuminati. I'm going to call it the sociopathic old world agenda. How's that? That's what I'm going to name it right here, right now. We are feeding that sociopathic old world agenda, which sees nothing but itself and feeds nothing but itself. So when we want to claim that we're not part of anything and we're by ourselves and we're alone and everything is terrible and everybody but us is wrong, we're forgetting that we are interconnected beings in this third dimension. Interconnected beings, people. That's who we are in this third dimension. So we can disagree with each other all we want. Yet it's not going to make any difference if we destroy the planet we're living on, because we're actually fulfilling the agenda for those who are pushing that sociopathic old world agenda. Listen, there are people out there that have underground bunkers that are literally hundreds and hundreds of feet across. I mean, we're not talking just some hole people dug in their backyard. When I go out there and psychically survey what's actually out there in the United States, there are people and organizations that have built huge bomb shelters into the sides of mountains, down underground. There are people who, in the case of a nuclear war or some kind of weird viral holocaust, are going to head to these bunkers. These are real things. Okay? Now, it's really, really stunning to me that somebody would actually take up that much time and build and carve out a mountain and try to make some kind of a hideaway there, rather than just attempting to make the world a more peaceful place. Yet the fear that drives that consciousness that says, no, we need to have underground bunkers and we need to live there. And listen, I know a lot of you are listening to me say that, and you're thinking, you are nuts, sister. You're sitting up there in Montana. It's wintertime. You have lost your ever-loving mind. You're crazy. People aren't actually taking millions to billions of dollars and building underworld bunkers to survive a nuclear holocaust or a viral holocaust. And you're crazy. I wish I was crazy. I do. I wish those people would take those millions and billions of dollars and invest them in education and make the world a more enlightened place. Yet they don't think outside of the self. They think in terms of the self. And once they're thinking in terms of the self, that self digs a hole in the mountain and takes its 100 pounds of beans and locks itself in. And there you're living your life as the internal Ziploc bag person. I mean, that just sounds completely depressing to me. But to some, the power of knowing that they're the few hundred left on the earth while everybody else died, that's the rush. That's the sociopathic part. That's the narcissistic part. That's the part that if we continue to fear, okay, and we continue to put all of that smoke in the kitchen, that's the part that's going to really make a dent in taking the world down. Yet we're not going to let that happen, are we? Not at all. We're going to get out there and we're going to educate people on the fact that chaotic darkness is attracted to the smokestack that comes out of our head that creates fear. We're going to get out there and we're going to tell people, hey, guess what? I know you're afraid. Yet go ahead and have that emotion, then let it go. Get your camera on that wide angle lens to see this truly for what it is. And what you think it is isn't what it is. It's not what it is. Not at all. Not even close. Humans, here's the deal. We can do whatever we want with this third dimension, whatever we want. We can do whatever we want. We can destroy it. Angels aren't going to stop us from destroying it. They won't. They'll let us. Angels aren't going to stop that. We can edify it. We can grow it. Angels are going to help us do that too. Why won't the angels stop us from destroying ourselves? Well, that would take away from free will, and they're actually here to help us with our decisions, not program us with decisions. I know that's disappointing for many people listening today, but it is indeed the truth. So let's just remind ourselves what we're here to do, how we're here to proceed forward, and why it's important to stay out of fear. Do you really want to be the bomb shelter person, investing billions of emotional dollars in digging a hole in the side of a mountain so you and 100 of your closest friends that hold your echo chamber exact opinion can be the only people left on Earth? I mean, my God, that's a really bad Planet of the Apes episode with the bad makeup and Roddy McDowell. Come on. Let's not go there. Anyway. Wow, I cannot believe that we blew through an hour so quickly. I tell you what, gang. Listen, I am so excited to bring these podcasts to you weekly. And if we can someday hit our mark of 2,500 subscribers, then I can bring you 2 hours of this podcast. I'm not sure where you're going to carve that out of your day to listen to it, yet I've been receiving a lot of mail from people saying, can it be 2 hours after hearing the first one, which is really cool, and I appreciate that. So listen, let's go about your day. Do the best you can to hold in compassion those who have a differing opinion than you do. Believe me, for every person that we are rolling our eyes at, there are 2 people rolling their eyes all back. It's all good. It's part of the human experience. Our job is to just hold each other with dignity and compassion. So go out into this week and do that. And I'm going to celebrate my 49th birthday today. So woohoo! Knocking on 50. Knocking on 50. All right, gang, you take care of yourself. Much love to everybody, and I'll see you next week.